Science, the supernatural, biblical prophecy, global events that threaten to rattle the very foundation of human existence. Critical examinations of the most important issues facing today's modern world. Welcome to the Sharpening Report. And now, your host, Josh Peck.
Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we have a very special returning guest, Gonz Shimura, to talk about his research into CERN, hybrid armies, and all sorts of other unusual things. Gonz Shimura is the mastermind behind Age of Deceit 1 and 2, two films that look at various aspects of our modern world from a prophetic lens. He also helped put together Inhuman, the very first documentary put out by Defender Films, and actually, which just won a Silver Telly Award, which is the highest award that they give out. Now, if this is your first time to the Sharpening Report, welcome. We're glad that you're joining us. Don't forget to subscribe if you're viewing this on YouTube. There's a little subscribe button in the lower corner. You can do it that way. And if you're not viewing this on YouTube, go to youtube.com/JoshPeckDisclosure. You can subscribe there. Or you can just go to sharpeningreport.com and there's tons of links. So if you subscribe, you can get access to all past episodes of the Sharpening Report, plus new ones done about every week or so. You'll also find a lot of other videos on my channel relating to end times, prophecy, the Bible, quantum physics, geopolitics, and many other informative and fascinating topics. So, without further ado, I'd love to welcome Gonz Shimura to the show. Gonz, how are you doing?
What's up, Josh? How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. It's good to talk to you again. I just realized the other day, because I got one of those Facebook memory posts, it's been over 2 years since we've had you on last.
Wow,
for
2 years.
Yeah, and that was for Age of Deceit 2. It doesn't seem like that's been out for 2 years.
I guess it has, huh?
Yeah.
And that was I remember that was pretty early on. That was probably what, like episode 6 or something for your show. So
yeah, it was only, I think it was like 27, but it was only like
27.
It was
6 or 27, you know.
They're close enough. but it was only like the 4th or 5th video interview, because I think episode 24, if I remember right, was the very first video interview. So that might be where you're thinking that. Was
the first one I did video?
No. No.
Yeah, I don't remember doing video.
No, I couldn't get you to do it. You didn't want to do it.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a big video guy.
But I finally twisted your arm enough over the past 2 years to get you to do one.
Yeah. Get my face out there in Skype so they can identify me with, all the eye technology stuff,
Exactly. Well, at least
to the New World Order.
Exactly. At least you're not wearing a mask.
True. That is true. I am kind of scrolling through your videos here. I see Basil's, situation.
His situation.
And everybody else, has good lighting and they look all good. And I'm over here. I'm in my closet. This is my closet door. So, my high tech office is at play here. So.
Well, that's okay. People don't tune in for the lighting. I don't think that'd be weird if they did. The Sharpening Report, it's an okay enough show. I don't really like the content, but man, the lighting, that's the only reason I watch it for 3 hours.
That really is the reason why, or if I do stay and watch your interviews, if it's good lighting, I'll stick around. If not, and plus my light's flickering, so yeah. I might look like I'm in the dark after a few minutes, but
yeah, so pretty much no one is going to be watching this because the lighting is just so awful.
There you go.
So all that being said, since no one's going to be listening or watching, you've been following CERN for quite some time. You have the CERN Watch deal on your YouTube channel, and for people out there, if you haven't gone to the FaceLikeTheSun YouTube channel, go there and subscribe. He doesn't have nearly enough subscribers, and actually we're kind of worried about his YouTube channel because it might be closing down. I mean, there's only just barely over 100,000. That's it. Oh.
Yeah, I'm about 104,000 subscribers right now. So,
ouch.
Yeah,
that's rough. So we all need to band together and help Gonz out here.
unlike Josh Peck, who tried to steal my subscribers. I remember you were very shameless last time you were on. I think it was the podcast. You were like, "Come over to my channel.
Yeah,
and subscribe to me."
Any chance I get, and actually I'm assuming probably more of your subscribers than mine, because I only have like 11,000 compared to your over 100,000, so I'm assuming probably more of your subscribers are watching this. So if you're watching this and you're a subscriber to FaceLikeTheSun, come on over to JoshPeckDisclosure. You'll love it. Subscribe to my channel. Please, I need you. Okay.
I love how desperate you get. It's hysterical.
I'm shameless. I don't mind. So CERN, you've been doing the CERN watch thing for a long time. You even contributed an interview for my upcoming book on CERN and various things. What specifically about CERN interests you?
Well, initially, I mean, the topic of CERN has been around for a while now. And it really was a blog post I wrote, I think a year and a half ago, that really got me thinking about it. And then obviously last year, for some reason, with the information of the new collider, re-upping the collider, everyone got on board and the conspiracy world went nuts because, oh my gosh, they're creating portals and all this. But really, it was my blog post that talked about the connection between the Tower of Babel story and some of the claims that CERN was making, and the things that they were allegedly trying to do that really sparked my interest, because we're at a time, and we've been looking at the advancement of science and technology and everything, and look at it from a biblical perspective, and it really, what they're trying to do, or what they're saying they're trying to do, really is reminiscent of what the Tower of Babel, just not just reaching into heaven, but also where God says nothing they imagine to do will be impossible for them. That sounds like something like CERN, where they're really trying to understand and harness, the smallest quantum levels of creation, and trying to do good with it is what they say. But we all know that there's probably some other agendas going on. So that's just kind of been my journey with it. And Anthony Patch came around last year, really got in front of the conversation, and learned a lot from him. And it's just been an interesting thing. And people, sometimes I think people over exaggerate, and I'm not guilty of that. Sometimes I might say, oh, look, this is it right here. But for the most part, I think we're just keeping an eye on it, because they are definitely tapping into some areas of creation that I think could potentially do some interesting things as we keep going here.
Yeah, I agree. That's what my research into it is shown as well. It's a crazy time that we're living in. What of interest has been going on at CERN lately?
Well, the best thing that's happened recently is the meme that I saw you post, which was a giant weasel coming out of CERN, and it was because of the story that a weasel chewed through some cables and it shut down CERN. So there's that, and that could be a God thing. I'm just going to throw it out there that God would use a weasel to shut down CERN. Not a comet, not some kind of fire from heaven, but a weasel that goes in and chews some wires. It sounds like God to me. But aside from that, they have been doing a lot of interesting things, putting out a lot of information. Just recently, they did a data dump. Basically, they got 300 terabytes of data that they've collected, and they just made it public. And part of the issue is CERN collects, I don't know, I don't remember the exact word. It's like petabytes or flippin' bytes or something, like just ridiculous amounts of data. But they don't have the resources to go through it all. Mm-hmm. So, they made it public, or 300 terabytes of it, which isn't a whole lot when you consider they're getting petaflops or whatever of data. But, it just goes to show that they need help. They're trying to get funding, all this stuff. There's a lot of nations involved, but we'll see what comes of this, the 300 terabytes of information that's out there. The light just got really bright. So that's going on. And I just published a video yesterday on that topic. And I was actually reading the CERN website, looking at kind of their computing page, and they talk about the computing and what they're doing. And a phrase jumped out at me, and and it's the phrase was digital reconstruction. And basically what they said is, oh, we're collecting all this data, and then we're processing it, and through digital reconstruction, we're able to assess or analyze what we've done. And I thought that was really interesting because, when we talk about, we've often discussed, and if you go to my channel, if we look at your channel and Anthony Patch and others who've talked about this, the big thing is, oh, they're trying to open up portals. That's kind of the main sort of narrative in the conspiracy world. And, a lot of people have speculated how does that even work? Mm-hmm. Is it literally just, like a supernatural, this thing opens up and there's people in there or whatever, or is it something else? And I've been looking at, just the digital virtual realities, things that are coming upon us, and how augmented reality, which is kind of a form of virtual reality where you see the world around you, but based on glasses or whatever you wear, there are superimposed pieces over, our regular sort of world. And all these things are changing kind of our experience. Well, I often thought that the virtual digital realm was sort of a reflection of some kind of spirit realm, and maybe not exactly, but definitely in concept at the very least. So when I read that CERN was, what they're doing is they're grabbing the data and they're reconstructing it digitally, my brain just started doing, the crazy dot connection kind of stuff, and I realized, maybe what if they're wading through all that data, and they come to a place where they find some sort of data and they reconstruct it digitally, and it literally unlocks or opens up a virtual reality that is like a whole realm. And if you think about it, we've created virtual realms. We have, and I mentioned in the video, World of Warcraft, this entire world, with characters and agents within it, and characteristics, and even some, and you can kind of fix the laws of the physics within that virtual reality. Second Life is another big one where you can literally interact with others and move around. And so we've come to a place where we can create virtual landscapes, just a whole virtual world. It would be very interesting if the data that they collect and a virtual reconstruction of that, from our end, unlocks or opens up a whole virtual reality where we're interacting with people. And the key is that this virtual reality is something that we didn't author. Mm-hmm. It would be very strange if we come across and go, oh, wow, this is a whole virtual landscape that we can interact with, but we didn't create this. Who built this? So, I'm just, I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but I thought it was apropos. I thought it was a possible avenue by which some of these things can happen. I'm sorry about my light; it keeps flickering on and off, so I might get bright and dark and.
Oh, that's fine.
But yeah, that's kind of what I was looking at recently, and then I tied it into the speech that went kind of viral this week, which was General Mark Millet when he was talking about. He was talking to the cadets, the ROTC cadets, the graduates, and of course he mentioned hybrid armies and little green men, and of course that thing just went all over the place. And I tied that in just because it was a relevant thing that happened this week, but I think it all connects to some of the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, that was actually a question that I had, but before we get there, I want to talk about more about portals. Do you believe that portals to other dimensions or realities, do they exist, and if so, can they be created or manipulated by human beings? And again, if so, how?
I do think they exist. I think, number one, biblically, I think there's some indication that something like a portal was displayed. I think when the Bible talks about a whirlwind coming from the north, I think there's some interpreters or interpretations that can draw from that and say, okay, that's strange, something that's spiraling and spinning coming from the north. So there's something like that, but also just scientifically, and I'm not a scientist, but based on some of the things that scientists have been saying, They seem to suggest that it's a plausible thing. Most recently, Stephen Hawking came out and said black holes are probably portals into, alternative dimensions or whatever, which is very interesting because, there's a CERN connection there too. Because if, one of the things that when CERN first went online, people were concerned that they would create a black hole and the entire universe would be sucked into it or whatever. And, most physicists assured like, hey, that's not going to happen. If we create black holes, it's so brief, they're so small that nothing would come of it. But it's interesting. There's a connection because it's like, okay, they're creating black holes or potentially creating black holes. And now they're saying black holes are portals into other dimensions. I mean, what? So, yeah, it seems like man can sort of create that. And maybe that's, and again, tying it back to the Tower of Babel, potentially that's kind of what mankind maybe was trying to do, is create a portal from our end. And it's fascinating to consider because, obviously, what does it mean? And, I just told you about the potential virtual reality that the digital reconstruction might open up. The way the sciences would describe that is, we have officially proved multi-dimensions or extra dimensions or whatever you want to call it. And we're able to access it or, peer into it via the virtual reconstruction. So that's where I think the virtual realities and sort of this extra dimensional concept overlap, and it can manifest basically in our reality. But in terms of portals, I do think, I think stuff like that exists. Can man control it? I think to some degree, I think man has the ability to and knowledge, and I think there's knowledge out there, ancient knowledge that perhaps teaches or indicates or leads man to have some sort of opening of a portal, and not just at a physical sort of connection, but I also think if we're talking spiritually, I've always considered that even ourselves, our minds itself is essentially some sort of portal, maybe not to the, to how we might imagine a Stargate portal or something like that, but in terms of, having our direct connection to God or having our direction to the spirit world, we ourselves are sort of conduits, vessels, so to speak, where our being, our souls, or whatever you want to call it, can connect to a supernatural or spiritual side of things. So, there's a lot of nuances, a lot of different angles you can take. But yeah, I do think portals exist, and I do think man can manipulate it given the right technology.
Same here. So this whole this general that talked publicly about hybrid armies, for those who might not be familiar with that, what's the story there, and what do you think is in store for the near future?
Oh, man. I mean, boy, okay, so the story is that this guy, General Mark Milley, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, he spoke at the 39th U.S. Army Chief of Staff. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to read through here. It was at Norwich University. And the video I pulled is directly from the Norwich University website, so it hasn't been tampered with or whatever. And it was the 100th anniversary of the founding of the ROTC. And in celebration of that, there was a huge celebration ceremony and a lecture. That was part of his lecture called Leading Through Complexity. And, it's a general speech talking about leadership, talking about, the various kinds of challenges that we will face and all this stuff. And then he kind of throws in, of course, right? It's always sort of subtle, but groundbreaking. He throws in a couple ideas where he says, first off, that we're gonna have turbulent times. Perhaps the most turbulent times we've ever seen, or whatever. And that itself is kind of like, all right, that's kind of rhetoric or whatever. It can be whatever. But then he goes into how the cadets need to have open minds and adaptive minds to be able to deal with the complexities of the world. And he talks about how it involves many different dynamic elements that's hard to describe in sentences. And if you kind of watch his cadence as he's talking about this, you can tell he's sort of trying to say things without saying the words. You can tell he's genuine about some of the things he's saying, and a genuine concern over his sort of cadence and just the way he's moving and stuff. And then he says, if the world of 1916 was complex, or the world of 1945 was complex, the world of 2016 is intensely complex. And then he says, you'll be dealing with terrorists, you'll be dealing with hybrid armies, you'll be dealing with little green men.
Wow.
Yeah, so just drop that in there, like, no, no big deal. Hybrid armies, little green men, whatever. And the interpretation for sort of your more mundane approach has been that little green men actually just represents. I think a couple years ago there was the Ukrainian conflict. The phrase "little green men" was used to represent, I believe it was like the Ukrainian army or the Russian people with masks and green suits. That, I don't know, something with Crimea and all that stuff that happened a couple years ago. Little green men was used in that context. So, people were saying, oh, he's just saying little green men, referring to the Ukrainian conflict. The problem with it, though, is one, he put hybrid armies and little green men back to back. Number two is that little green men in America, traditionally, for the last 60 plus years, has meant only one thing, and that's aliens, culturally speaking. Now, if he was, if he was a Russian, or if he, was a foreigner, if he used the phrase little green men in that context, maybe a little bit more of a chance that he was actually referring to the Crimea thing. But you don't accidentally say stuff like that. You don't put stuff in there that's not relevant or has meaning. Words do have meaning. Phrases do have meaning. And so it is very strange that he used that term. And then the hybrid armies thing, and I was talking to Justin Fowle of Fourth Watch, and he was suggesting that he had talked to some military friends, and the official military phrase to use, because you can take it as, hybrid as in, different sorts of combat, if you want to call it that. You have cyber attack, and then you have ground troops, and maybe both at the same time. It's a hybrid. But the phrase they use for that is hybrid warfare, I believe. There's a specific military term for it. Hybrid armies is not in the military vocabulary, according to Justin and his contacts in the military. So that leads Justin and convinces me that this general had probably seen some very interesting things, and the only way he can convey what he's seen and what he might know to be our future is to drop little phrases like hybrid armies and little green men as things, as challenges we will face, right? And this is what's fascinating, is that it's consistent with other military leaders that have spoken. You have General MacArthur back in, I think it was in the 60s, when he actually made the speech that talked about interstellar warfare. Now, in fact, if you read that quote from the 60s, it was a graduation of, I think, I don't exactly remember. I think it was West Point, and he describes transhumanism back in the 50s or 60s or whenever that speech was. He talks about weather modification, genetics. I mean, this is crazy talk in the 60s, but he's talking about all this, but also talking about it in a positive light, like, oh, we're going to have all these abilities and all this stuff. And then you have, obviously, Reagan in the 80s, saying, oh, the world would unite if there was an outside threat. And then Gorbachev, saying, yeah, I agree with him, but he talked about it too early, which was another interesting sort of angle or twist to the whole thing. And then more recently, you have Clinton, not Hillary, but Bill. Have a clip in Age of Deceit 2 in the introduction. Bill Clinton was in either Europe or Asia or something. I think it was Asia, in some sort of Pacific or Pan-Pacific meeting. And he mentions in that meeting that that the young generation, the next generation, they're going to see some strange things and things from above or something. I think the phrasing was something along those lines. And he says that life is going to get really interesting. So there's all these little hints, right, that something's coming. And is it the deception? Is it going to be some sort of unveiling? Is it the L.A. Marzulli mile-wide craft over every large city in the world? Is it that, or is it, we don't know, but they seem to be suggesting that there is a tipping point coming, an affair or an event that will cause ripples and completely change the paradigm and the perspective, the worldview of the world. And, part of, I think, our jobs as watchmen and as doing this kind of work is to keep our finger on the pulse with this stuff, because, if and when something big does happen, we'll be ready. We'll be prepared to talk about it. People can come to us and say, hey, we've been looking at this for years, that sort of thing. So, we might sound like crazy people at the moment, which is fine. I've been labeled the crazy person for a while now. And I know you have too, Josh, but I do think that it has precedence. And the more we go through here, the more time passes, the more, for good or for bad, these things that we've said and have talked about, it's kind of being vindicated in sort of the mainstream light, which, again, is a good and bad thing. It's like, yay, the stuff we've talked about is true, but then it's like, well, it's leading to the apocalypse. So, it's kind of a give and take. But I do think we're going to see some strange things, and even just the hybrid armies part of it. If you've looked at DARPA, which is just one small public sector of advanced technologies in the military, there is some crazy developments happening there. I've often thought that what we're going to start seeing is a debate and a conversation within sports, particularly, I believe, like the Paralympics. What's going to happen when these guys who have prosthetic legs or whatever starts breaking world records, in the 100-meter dash or something like that. The questions will become, well, is he the fastest man, or do we have a separate category because he has prosthetics or some enhancements or whatever? In the world of sports, I think, is going to be a big arena where some of these changes in humanity are going to start happening. And then obviously on the military grounds, out there on the battlefield, they're already starting to manipulate genes and DNA, and, there's already some pretty advanced technologies that have crossed into weaponry, and that includes the soldier himself. So, the hybrid armies thing, it's not even a stretch to consider that a possibility, even in the most minute or mundane sense of the word. I think it's already happening. Now, the more sensational sort of interpretation of that is, oh, Nephilim army, here they come, so we can go there. But I don't even think we have to go there to see that what this general stated as hybrid armies is true. And then the little green men, I don't know. Again, is it really going to be aliens? I don't think so. But the fact that he would say it suggests that he probably has some sort of insight. He's probably seen some things, that he can't explain, or he sums up as extraterrestrial, perhaps. But yeah, no, I do think we're going to see some strange things, and it includes robots and everything else, and that end of it. But also, along with that, the potential of strange creatures, synthetic biologies, not just from the underworld or from the spiritual dimension, but really just from our own. When I say our own, I mean humanity. Our own laboratories. We're already producing strange creatures and stuff. I think there's a lot of that going on. So, yeah, I think the future is going to be interesting. I have to agree with some of these people, like Bill Clinton Clinton who say that it's going to be interesting. So, although our conclusions will probably disagree.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's going to be interesting too. Putting all these dots together and all these various connections. Where do you think? Because if they started talking about this in the 60s, at least publicly, or maybe more in the spotlight, where do you think in another 50 years from now, if the Lord tarries and if the singularity in 2045 doesn't happen, or even if it does, where do you see? How do you see the next 50 or so years playing out? What type of future do you think we're headed towards?
Oh man. I think what we will see, well, first off, the immediate future, what is not talked about enough is the fourth industrial revolution that's about to explode, and that means a implementation of infrastructure, technological infrastructure that is built around nanotechnology, biotechnology. Some of these more advanced quantum sciences, even with quantum computers, things that we have been sort of tracking and talking about for a while, but now they're going to start building it. I think Tesla's, or not Tesla, the guy who started Tesla, I'm blanking on his name. It's too early, Josh. My brain isn't quite awake yet. What's his name? The guy who made the Elon Musk. Okay,
oh, right.
Elon Musk, yeah, and his Hyperloop, right? They're building a prototype of the Hyperloop here in Southern California. So stuff like that they're building infrastructure. I reported on a video that I made last week. The year 2020, the Tokyo Olympic Games. Some of the plans they have for that is a whole race or a flood of robots in Tokyo that are going to help assist in various things, driverless taxis that can drive people around, robots to help direct people where to go. There's even going to be a robot village. It's just robots. Devices, applications to help translate, so people can communicate with one another, which goes back to the Babel idea, which is interesting. And also, they're talking about airplane flights to Japan to carry the Olympians on airplanes that have that are run by algae, which has been kind of a discussion about alternative fuel sources and stuff like that. So that's going to happen. The other part of it that's not discussed enough is job loss. There's going to be, and it's already starting to happen, a huge segment of society that are going to be laid off and replaced by robots and computers. There's that whole recently, I can't remember which chain fast food restaurant it was, but they're saying, hey, we're gonna have robots make your burgers because they're more accurate. It's faster, it's cleaner, whatever. That's going to be an interesting thing, and that's something that the politicians, all the presidents and or presidential campaign and everything that's happening now. That question, the fourth industrial revolution, the technological revolution that's about to explode, and the unemployment rate that's going to skyrocket based on the replacement of these jobs with machines. It's not brought up at all, and it's a very important question because it's right in front of us. Our children are probably going to be affected by it. What do we do? Do we go into some sort of major social, program where we just pay these people who are jobless just some money so they can live? I mean, what's going to happen? What are we going to be doing? So it makes me wonder, are we going to become like the movie Surrogate, where we're just, in a closet, working our avatar robot that's out in the world doing whatever, going to clubs and partying, whatever. Like, what are we going to be exactly doing? So that kind of stuff, I think within the next decade, I think we're going to see a lot of that. but it depends also, because if there is a major setback, if there is a catastrophe of some kind, or something gets out of hand, a death of somebody, or something where certain integrative technologies don't work out, it could set stuff back, because the population will say, we're not ready to have DNA alterations on all of us yet. We saw this happen to this person, whatever. So that kind of thing can happen. But in 50 years, let's see, you and I will be on a porch somewhere, probably reminiscing of this conversation.
Very true. Yeah, we'll be late in our 80s.
Yeah, having robots spoon feed our medication. And we'll still try. We'll be writing. I'll be writing my first book.
Yeah, you'll still be working on it.
I'll still be working on it. I'm on page 10,000. I got it. And you'll be working on your 500th book. I'll be really annoyed by you. I don't know, 50, I mean, 50 years. What year is that going to be? 2066?
Yeah.
Boy, I think virtual realities are going to be everywhere. We're going to, the sort of disturbing scene of the person, the human with the virtual glasses on, sitting, laying out on the side, kind of looking really frail, but having an adventure in the virtual realm or whatever. That kind of thing we'll probably start seeing. I do think mainstream media does portray some of what they hope humanity will become. Wall-E, you have the, overweight, we're sitting in chairs, our bones don't even do anything anymore because we're just, lazy. That kind of scenario is a possibility. There's a book called The Utopia Chronicles, which is a fiction. It's a science fiction book, and it's written by I think Matthew Mather, who's he's just a secular guy, but he projects that in the near future, we will exist in multiple sort of layers of virtual reality. So we will have our physical body, but our physical bodies will be almost overtaken by what we would call a proxy. And basically what it would do is keep us breathing. If we need to go to the restroom, we can do that or whatever. But we won't really be where we are. Our minds, so to speak, will be in other virtual realms doing different things. And that sort of depiction of what's going on in Utopia Chronicles is a strong possibility of how things might work out. But I think the biggest thing, the most plausible scenario, in my opinion, if the Lord tarries and things continue, is what Dr. Hugo de Garis outlines, which is a class warfare. And he, outlines the cosmists, the Terrans, and the cyborgists, which basically are three different classes of humans that will arise from this technological revolution. The have and the have-nots, the gap will be widened. And in the same way that humanity has had, slavery throughout our history, the ideas of eugenics that has, not too much in the past, in the last century. All these ideas, I think, will play out in a much more tangible and almost kind of scary way because, I've talked about it, and Richard Dolan brought it up, but the phrase breakaway civilization, is currently used in the sense of, there's probably an elite group that got their hands on a large amount of money after World War II, and they started developing technologies that would blow our minds today. And they're literally a civilization that is apart from the rest of us. Yeah, that's possible in sort of the conspiracy kind of mindset, but I think we're going to see the reality, a true civilization, a human civilization that is apart from the rest of humanity, very much like the movie Gattaca.
Mm-hmm.
where, there's a whole class and they're genetically modified and you have to, you're tied into this system. And if you're not born into it, if you're not tied into that system, then you have problems in society. So I truly think that is going to become more and more prominent. It's an endeavor that even Dr. James Hughes, who, I watched hours of his conversation with Tom Horn when I was making Inhuman. One of the things that he's really focused on is this sort of class warfare problem that will arise. And he looks at the job thing too, but really it's the class thing. I mean, people that have money, people that have access to the resources, they're the ones that are going to be enhanced and, genetically modified and, replacement of limbs, replacement of the body even. So it's a very interesting thing to consider, but what are we looking at when we're talking about reality? I think prophetically it lines up perfectly with what we read about with the mark of the beast and the image of the beast and the consequences of people who take that being unredeemable. I think there is some precedence there. It almost fits like a glove, and the question of what it means to be human is questioned and broken down, and we don't even know anymore. In the secular world, they have whole conferences, philosophical conferences. What does it mean to be human? I mean, have we really gotten to that point where we don't know what it means to be human? It takes a human to ask that question, which is the ironic part there. But I think a continued decay of values, moral values, the family. These are things that I think have been attacked for a long time, but I think we'll see more of that and exponentially grow to a point where, again, a rift in civilization. I'm prayerful that it doesn't lead to what Dr. Hugo de Garis calls gigadeath, which is 1 billion deaths because of this clash and this war. But I got to admit, it's a possible thing if you're starting to talk about a true sort of revolutionary war between your Terrans who are saying, hey, let's stay human. Let's stay human how we were created. And then your cosmists who just want to embrace it all, right? Inject the nanobots or whatever. And then the cyborgists who are in between, they're sort of, hey, let's enhance humanity with these machines, but not necessarily, become not human anymore. So I think there is some precedence there, and I think it's interesting. We got to keep our finger on the pulse. But the more I talk about this, the more I just pray Jesus come back, because stuff's going to get really bizarre.
Yeah, same here. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Well, you got a ton of viewer questions sent in, so I probably will start those a little earlier than usual, but because there's so many, which is always good to see. If you at home want the chance to send in viewer questions to future guests, you can go to the Sharpening Report Facebook group. You can just search for it on Facebook, or you can go to sharpeningreport.com, and there's a link there. Basically, how it works is whenever I set up an interview with somebody, I'll put a post, I'll pin a post in the group, and then you can leave comments and questions for that specific guest. So, you, Gonz, got just so many. I don't know how much time you have for this, so it's fine if we don't get to all of them, but I did want to at least dedicate a good portion of the show to this, because there, like we were talking about before the show, there's a lot of relevant and just really good questions. People are hungry for the truth, and it's always good to see.
Yeah.
All right. So first question comes in from Joshua. He asks, what advice would he have for someone that's taking a blog into the area of podcasts?
Okay, so maybe I should come up with a product that you see all those people that talk about these things, making money, teaching people how to make money. That's not what this is, but what advice for someone taking a blog into the area of podcast? I guess I'm not clear about what he's asking, because does he already have a blog that's successful, or does he just want to start a podcast, or I guess I'm not clear about that, but I guess anyone who wants to get into this area of, publishing material and stuff like that, my sort of thing that I've always told people is just do it, do it and do it consistently. And I know, I get it. Canary Cry Radio is not the most consistent podcast out there.
Yeah.
But we do persist, and we do overcome some of the things that we face to make sure that there's an episode out every so often. And then obviously the YouTube channel is almost daily. One of the things that I think people don't realize is that, you really have to love doing this.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to make a lot of money doing it. You're not going to make a ton of friends. You're probably going to attract trolls, a lot of trolls and stuff. So my advice to Joshua here would be to really assess whether you love doing what you plan to do with your blog or podcast first. And if he does already have a blog and he's he wants to start a podcast, that's great, because a podcast, you'll reach a whole different audience there. And there's a phrase in sort of the entrepreneurial world, which is be everywhere, which means have stuff in print, have stuff in video, have stuff in podcast audio. Make yourself available to as much area, or as much of media as possible, because there's people who just read. There are people who just watch videos. There are people who only listen to podcasts. So, diversifying that outlet is important, but it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time to do that. I conceptually, I even understand that, but I haven't been able to execute on that to the level I would like to. It would help to have a team like Skywatch over there with, a whole crew working on it. But, number one is you got to love doing it. That's my biggest advice, because, even within the time that you and I have been doing this, we've seen a lot of shows come and go. We've seen people get really excited, start a project, but then, they do 1 or 2 episodes or whatever, and then they realize the amount of work that goes into it, and it kind of tails off and goes away. And also, don't be discouraged if you're not getting the viewership or the listens initially, because, again, part of building your platform is to have back content. We live in the age of binge watching, right? So somebody who discovers your podcast, if you only have 2 episodes, all right, good episodes, but they're waiting for that next one. But someone who, for example, discovered Canary Cry Radio at episode 100, there's 100 episodes they can go through, and they can just immerse themselves with everything that we've talked about, all the different interviews and stuff we've done. So creating that catalog, creating that archive is part of the process. And you never know when, you'll break through. You'll have that one episode that really grabs the attention of the community of people you're trying to reach, and boom, they look at you, they find you, and look, you got 50 episodes, that are under your belt that, people haven't known about, but now they can go back and listen and sort of, walk through the journey with you. So just keep that in mind, keep that in perspective, I would say, because, the payoff doesn't come right away, and I know Josh knows that, because he's been begging me to give him subscribers for years.
And again, for all those out there who are subscribed to FaceLikeTheSun, come and subscribe to JoshPeckDisclosure. You're gonna love it.
So yeah, that's my biggest advice is persistence. Got to love what you do and build it. That whole, if you build it, they will come. There's a little bit of truth to that, I think. But yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
It's excellent advice, and I concur. It is a lot of hard work, but eventually it is worth it. But also, I mean, I think the amount of hard work that it is kind of helps weed out some of the people that might not take it seriously, or that might just want to try, and that's fine. It's always good to try stuff, but maybe it's not for them. So like you said, just do it and see what happens. I agree. Melissa writes in, I would love to hear some of the testimonies he has received from viewers of either his documentaries, YouTube videos, or from Canary Cry Radio that really encouraged him to keep going.
That's a great question. We get tons of testimonies, stories from people constantly. I mean, I get it for the YouTube channel and on Canary Cry Radio. Some of the ones that really keep us going, or at least keeps me going, are the stories that come from the parents that have young kids, teenagers or whatever. And they say, they walked away from the faith, or they're not really into it, but then they saw your video on this or that or whatever. And now he or she is back at church, and thank you. And that kind of thing really encourages me, because, ultimately, there's a truth to preaching to the choir, right? And there's value in that. But ultimately we're trying to sort of reach the skeptic, or the one person who's questioning, and people that are seeking truth, right? That's ultimately what the people we're trying to reach. So, and a lot of those people are young people today, teenagers and stuff that are out there looking at different things. It's a tough landscape right now. There's a lot of information, conspiracy theories. There's a dime a dozen. There's all kinds of stuff now out there that you can look into. And from the biblical perspective, from the church perspective, there isn't a consensus amongst the church, in terms of these topics. But I know it helps people, because it helped me. That's the biggest thing. If it wasn't for the people that came before me, the Chris Whites, the Dr. Futures, even the Derek Gilberts and Tom Horns, these are people that helped me realize, like, okay, number one, I'm not crazy looking at these topics. Number two, it makes a heck of a lot more sense when you plug in the Bible prophecy aspect of it. So I'm trying to think of a specific testimony, and that's hard to nail down. But there's a lot of people who have emailed me and messaged me about Age of Deceit, really helping them in terms of understanding what's going on. People coming out of the New Age all the time, emailing me and messaging me and thanking me for that. But really, I always try to take that and say, praise God, all unto God, because I'm not really the one doing it per se. I'm just trying to do what I'm called to do, and that is to lead people to Christ and get people focused on God. So, there are a lot of encouraging messages that we get, and it keeps us going. And it's a good reminder, because we often sometimes, and this kind of ties back to that last question, but sometimes, man, it's like, what are we doing? I'm sitting here going, CERN, portal, what in the world? Like, why does this even matter? But it helps people, and when you start recognizing that, okay, this is making a difference. This is people that have real questions about these things. We're providing real possible answers, and ultimately pointing back to the scriptures and to Jesus and all this stuff. So it does make a difference. And so, going back to that first question, persist, but then with the testimonies, again, I can't think of one particular one off the top of my head, but a lot of them are very similar stories in either walking away from the faith, or we're into some totally different New Age thing, and then seeing a video that really, at least, maybe not directly changed their lives right then and there, but led them to a path of discovering these other truths from the Bible. So there's a lot of that, and it is really encouraging.
Praise God, that's fantastic. Peggy asks, how have his experiences with Inhuman and all the website attacks affected his walk? Yeah, you had to deal with some hackers and things lately, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. The experience with Inhuman, that was fun. I loved working with Tom Horn and the whole Skywatch team with that film. It was interesting because, there's a different feeling, and I got this feeling when I was making the first Age of Deceit too, and also, excuse me, and also part two. But you sit there and you're editing, right, and you're kind of putting stuff together, and every so often you have to stop and go, okay, this is going to be viewed by a lot of people. A lot of people are going to watch this and they're going to judge it. They're going to, whatever, they're going to gain knowledge or information from it. And with Inhuman, it was different because, it wasn't my film. It was Tom Horn's film. But I know Tom has a pretty big audience, So I felt this pressure of like, okay, I have to make sure that Tom is happy. But then at the same time, if this is going to get in front of Tom's audience, that's a whole bunch of people. So it was a good learning experience, but it was also great that I got to work with a team. Age of Deceit 1 and 2, it was me, and I would have a meeting with myself, like, okay, today let's talk about what we're gonna do and how we're gonna tackle this topic or this area or whatever. But it was very helpful to have a team of people with Donna and everybody there at Skywatch. Sharon was involved as well, and so it was a team effort, really. So that was really great. I love that, and I'm hoping to participate in future projects of that caliber. And the website attacks affecting my walk. I've always been a person that is that's been strong in the area of just having faith. And this was no different. It's almost like, okay, all these things happen, but there's a certain level of me that feels like it's going to work out. It's fine. God will take care of it. Yes, it is upsetting a lot of people because our whole podcast is down and no one can listen to it. Yes, it's upsetting because somebody keeps hacking our website. And interestingly enough, we moved everything to a new server and just a whole dedicated host and everything else. And we got these new security software plugins. And as soon as we turned those on, we realized there's somebody trying to log into our website literally every hour. Wow. Every single hour we're getting failed login from this IP address, failed login here, failed login. So we're blocking those IP addresses. And I think some of them are actually, probably a majority of them are just bots trying to hack the website. But somebody had to have initiated that bot to do that thing. So really, it hasn't affected my walk in a negative way. These kinds of things and challenges to me are they're part of the walk, I think, in general, and part of being in this space in general. And really, it just confirms for me that we're doing something right if we're getting attacked that much. So I'm not worried about it. If anything, it's strengthened my sort of faith in all this and sort of my confidence in continuing the production and the research and everything else, because it means we're getting the attention of somebody. I'm not going to say it's the Illuminati or it's them or whatever, but somebody doesn't like what we're saying or like what we're doing, and it's resulted in some website stuff. But ultimately, it's all, in my view anyway, God's going to make it all work out. But the part that I'm not excited about is I think this has affected other people in terms of, for example, last week we had Dr. Michael Heiser come, and he gave his lecture on Saturday. That week when I started promoting Dr. Heiser, his websites got hacked. Like both of his websites went down. So I was like, hey, sorry, Dr. Mike. Not saying that it was my fault, but just a strange coincidence that when I started talking about your website goes down as well. So I don't want that to happen to anybody. So Josh, maybe if I push you enough, we can bring you down.
Yay! Fantastic. Well, I can't say I'm looking forward to that, but if it happens, so be it. All right, good deal. Regina asks, what's your story, Gonz? Were you a New Age baby like most of us before the Holy Spirit knocked you over the head with the truth? And I'll say to the audience, too, Gonz actually did give his entire testimony the last time he was on, which I think it's episode 27 or 28. If you just search Gonz Shimura, Josh Peck, Age of Deceit 2, I'm sure it'll come up. It was an earlier sharpening episode, another good reason for people to subscribe. But anyway, so what's your story, Gonz?
I was born in an alien egg, and no. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't exactly a New Age baby. I grew up more of a atheistic, agnostic Buddhist. My parents were from Japan, so they're not exactly Buddhist either. Very ambiguous, really, but more of the sort of atheistic or agnostic bent. And that's kind of my background. I don't want to get into everything because, like you said, I think I go into that on the first sharpening with you.
Yeah.
But also, if you go to the Joyspiracy theory with Basil, I go through my whole testimony there. And also, I think Extraordinary Intelligence with Natalina. I think on her episode, one of her early episodes, I go through it. So, I refer Regina to those resources for the full thing. But in terms of the Holy Spirit knocking me over the head with truth, I would say there have been different beatings from the Holy Spirit, different levels, different time periods of life. The first one, the main one, was my wife who beat me over the head with it, and that led me to Christ. But then I think there was a purging time of kind of going back to worldly things that I had been involved with and trying to parse out how everything works at the same time and trying to understand from a biblical perspective what's going on with topics I was interested in, like aliens, UFOs, whatever, all these different topics, and not receiving the kind of edification from the church I was at, which caused me to go on YouTube, which caused me to find all these New Age videos of people talking about Jesus was just a space commander, Sananda. And then on Sunday I would go and Jesus is this loving, savior, figure. So there was an early period where I was very confused about, like, wait a minute, so who's telling the truth here? Is it church or is it these New Age guys who seem to be addressing my questions about conspiracies and the Illuminati and all these different things, yet their sort of understanding of Jesus, or who they say Jesus is completely different from what I'm hearing on Sundays. And in my heart of hearts, I believe the Jesus from Sunday was more true, but at the same time, I thought, well, these other areas with conspiracy and all this stuff, these New Agers seem to know what they're talking about with this stuff, and my church doesn't. So it was a balancing act in trying to find that sort of convergence point. And it was really the work of people. I think it was Ellie Marzulli that I've talked about. I was listening to Coast to Coast. I was a big Coast to Coast listener. Obviously, if you're into this stuff, you listen to Coast to Coast. And I just remember listening to him, and he was one of the first guys to really provide for me that biblical foundation. And he did it in a really interesting way. His whole thing with, I know Josh, and I'm sure the audience is familiar with him, and you may not agree with everything he says, which is fine. But he was really into, when I listened to that interview with George Norrie, he was talking about Yeshua and the guidebook to the supernatural and all this stuff. And that really kind of, okay, so there is an actual biblical perspective that's grounded. It's interesting because I had come across someone like Steve Quayle prior to that, and I remember thinking, like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about, but I feel like the world's going to end tomorrow listening to him. That's not anything against Steve Quayle. He's just, the way he speaks is very charismatic, and you start getting drawn in, but then I sensed, like, oh my gosh, it's too intense. Like, I don't know what's going on anymore. Like, should I get a bunker? Like, what should I do? I felt really paranoid. And so I needed to stay away from that paranoia aspect of someone like Quayle at the time. Although I appreciate his work. I have his books and everything else. But so yeah, it's been different levels and different phases of the Holy Spirit truth stick knocking me over the head. So I don't know if that answers Regina's question.
Yeah, I'm sure it does, and I have similar aspects in my own testimony as well, so I can definitely relate. Patrick asks, when is your music DVD? Are you producing a music DVD?
In theory, I have ongoing music projects that I've been working on. Been working on an EP with Sam Swanson over at he is at God's Property Media, I think it is now. And we have a group that we formed called Slave to Servant, and we have a couple songs out there. But he does most of the songwriting, and I'm just kind of the guitar player for that project. So I got that going on. I also have all the music that I've made for the documentary and my videos and stuff, and some of that you can get from the flash drive, the Canary Car Radio flash drive. I do need to officially release it at some point. So Patrick, stay tuned. I will I will keep working on it.
Maybe when you're in your 80s and
yeah, I'll have something. A DVD in those days will probably be obsolete, but I'll send you a digital DNA packet of my music. So you can just inject it right into your veins.
There you go.
I'm gonna get in so much trouble for saying that.
That's the only
chill.
Yeah. Well, you're getting that anyway, but that's the only way to experience Gonz's music is just mainline it right in.
Just inject it right in.
Tanya writes in, Age of Deceit and Age of Deceit 2 are fantastic. What is the story behind them that motivated you to make these films?
The first one, there's a couple different things. One, as I was coming out of that phase of learning all this stuff, I had accumulated quite a bit of information, and I had to do something with it. It was just, it's sitting on my brain, and I'm like, I have to let it out because it's driving me insane to know all this stuff, and not being able to shout it off a rooftop, right? And part of it was Chris White of Nowhere to Run. He had a podcast, and he made a call out. He said, hey, I was watching this ghost hunting show with my wife, and this guy starts doing a seance, and if someone wants to make a video addressing this topic, please do. So I took on the challenge. I said, yeah, I'll do it. So I made a video, and it's called The Truth Behind Ghost Hunting, and that was my first YouTube video. And I made a couple videos after that, but I decided, I've accumulated enough information here about the New Age and the New World Order and how it relates to Bible prophecy, and it's clicked in my head quite a bit. So I'm going to make a documentary, and so that was really what prompted Age of Deceit. And interestingly, that was it's 2011. The summer of 2011, I went to a conference in Branson. It was the Prophecy something. It was back in the day when, actually, I think it was Tom Horn and David Hitt who put together a prophecy conference. This was before Prophecy in the News and Gary Stearman and Bob Ulrich got involved. The following year was when they tagged in and started doing their own conferences. But in 2011, so I had made about a half hour of the film at that point, and I brought it to Branson to share with a few people just to see what they thought. And interestingly, after that visit, I decided to scrap the video and start completely over. And so that's what I did. And then that was July. And then in September, I released Age of Deceit 1. So that was that. And I didn't think anything of it. It was just like, it's a 2.5-hour video. If anyone wants to watch it, here it is. And then it picked steam, grace of God. It was like, I remember it hit like 10,000 views, and I'm like, oh my gosh, 10,000, that's crazy. And then I remember 100,000. I'm like, I'm a rock star. 100,000 views, I'm good to go. It was about a year, maybe a year and a half almost, when it hit 1 million, and I was blown away. But that was part one, and then part two was really, I knew sort of the writing on the wall in terms of transhumanism and technology and all that in part one. And I do mention transhumanism in part one, but I really wanted to address it. And I was really starting to see the connection with ancient practices of alchemy and sort of the philosophical overlap of technology. What are we doing with technology and science? Where is it headed? What's the foundation? And again, philosophically, it's pretty much the same thing as what alchemy and all these mystery religions have been teaching, which is the idea of apotheosis and some sort of substance or integration of man with some sort of machine or some sort of creation that causes them to live longer or live forever or whatever. And so I really wanted to address that topic in part 2. And it was a long journey. It was 3 years between part 1 and part 2. So, eventually that came around. And so motivation, just, study information and wanting to get it out there and wanting to share some of my sort of theories on certain topics and see if it has any credence or has any teeth. And it seems to be that people, for the most part, who share kind of the same worldviews, look at some of those videos and they say that they agree with the overall premise of what I'm saying. So
fantastic. Well, they are both excellent films. I've seen them both and love them both, and I highly recommend them to anybody out there who may not have seen them yet. Chad writes in, what secret projects is he close to unveiling? Books, movies? Also, is he working on anything else for Skywatch like he did with Inhuman?
Secret projects. I think there's a book that you and I are involved with, right? That,
with Doug Woodward, yeah.
Doug Woodward and Anthony Patch is part of that.
Yep.
Are we allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Okay.
Doug and I, when Doug was on a couple episodes ago, and we that was the first time that we talked about it. So yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay, so we got that, which is revising reality, and really kind of looking at sort of revising what's going on in reality. And this will be my official first published writing or written work. So I'm grateful to Doug Woodward for allowing me to do this. So I got that. Movies. I'm working on a couple different things. One is an early, and I've been kind of beating around the bush with it a little bit, but I have some general ideas of what I want to do for Age of Deceit 3.
Nice.
The vision is a little bit more grand, so it might take time. It might take money to do it. It might take some kind of fundraiser to do it because I can't. It would just part 1 and part 2 were done out of my own pocket. Pretty much a zero budget thing. Just I have some video editing software and let's go. So that part 1 and part 2 were very basic in that sense. But this next one I really want to tackle some bigger concepts and do a little bit more of a true documentary in a sense, not just a video with pictures and me talking the whole time or whatever. A little bit more of an investigative sort of out in the field sort of thing. So I have that kind of in the midst of all this other stuff happening, and then I am also working on what will hopefully be a movie on the supernatural. And technically, I'm waiting for an interview with you, Josh. I don't know how we're gonna do it. I think we had talked. I was gonna have you go out to some videographer out there where you used to live and do something. But
then I moved.
Then you moved, and we'll figure it out. But
come here and do it here. We'd love to have you.
That's kind of what I was thinking. But again, that takes money, and so we'll have to figure that out. But
right.
So yeah, that's a video or a DVD that I want to produce on the topic of the supernatural, specifically made for the church. So I don't want to get too crazy and off the wall Nephilim, portals, CERN. I don't want to go that direction too much. I want to have sort of a primer or just an introductory sort of thing for your average Christian, and really show them, like, number one, our faith, our belief system is supernatural. I know L.A. Marzulli talks about it all the time, like, we live in floating axes and guy resurrecting and walking on water, but then for some reason after Sunday we walk around like we're staunch materialists, which is true. It is true. We don't believe in the supernatural during the week, and then on Sunday it's praise God for all your miracles. So there's a little bit of a hypocrisy, if you want to call it that. So I want to help the greater church sort of re-grasp some of that, and do it from a biblical foundational thing, but also help those who are in more of a charismatic bent, and have them not move away from their charismatic side of things, but help ground some of that to Scripture in a sense. And I'm saying this from the perspective of we just had Dr. Mike Heiser in, and he's just so good at tying everything down to Scripture and like, hey, here's what it says, here's exactly what the Word tells us about these topics. So I really want, and I already I recorded my sit-down interview with him last weekend, so I have about 2 hours of just a sit-down interview with him that I think I'll include in the documentary. But I want it to be something where your more skeptical Christian can look at and say, you know what, you're right, there's a lot more supernatural stuff going on. Let me look into Genesis 6 more, or that kind of thing. But also your more charismatic Christian to say, okay, what really is the purpose behind something like speaking in tongues? Is it just a phenomenon that just happens and whatever? Or is there an actual purpose, a historical purpose for something like that, that stems all the way back to the Tower of Babel? And that's what some of the stuff Dr. Heiser talked about, which I thought was fascinating. And then also, the healings and stuff like that. And I came from a very skeptical side of things in terms of that stuff, like a lot of the charismatic stuff. I see videos and I see stuff on TV, and it's like, I don't know if I'm jiving with that, with some of the weird new agey things that are happening in some of these churches. But I do think there is a genuine part to all that. And I think what has happened is that the experiential side of Christianity has not been addressed properly, in my opinion. And so what has happened was these people who are very sensationalist in the charismatic sense, healings on stage, speaking in tongues on stage, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but making it a bigger showy thing than it is has turned off a lot of the church to say, no, it's not biblical, it's not correct. And so there's that one side, but then on the other side, there's people who get way too into that stuff, way too into the experience, trying to experience something, experience this, experience that. And they sort of throw out theology. And so they don't have anything that they're really having, or there's no real foundation to some of their experiences. And so I want to try to bring those two sides of Christianity or the church together and sort of discuss things and say, okay, let's bring it back to the Word, and sort of, I'm trying to break down walls here, because we have so many walls and denominations and different belief systems. And I think if we can have a conversation about some of these topics, we will realize that we are one and the same in Christ. And so we can rejoice in that, like Philippians 4 and Paul talks about. But also that there is sort of a proper biblical precedence to the experiential side of Christianity. And I think, again, that charismatic side, they're seeking the experience so much that because they don't have their guard up, they allow in all these new age things. And, now they're doing Kundalini things and, like weird, not good stuff as part of their experience of being filled with the Holy Spirit, when really it's probably not the Holy Spirit, So that's a big project. I know I thought it was going to be a simple thing, but it seems like it's going to be a little bit more complicated, only because it needs to stay simple. It needs to stay short. It needs to be under an hour, really. I can't do a 3-hour documentary like Age of Deceit 2. People aren't going to watch it. So it's going to have to be a very snappy, quick thing. And for some reason, to make something like that, to make it more mainstream, it's a little bit harder. You got the production value, the levels of everything has to be a little higher. The how fast the story moves has to be, So that's a big project. I wanted it to have it done by this summer, but there's just no chance that's going to happen. So that's a secret project that's not so secret that I've been working on.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a fantastic film and well worth the wait. Angie writes in, what does Gonz Shimura think of Planet X/Nibiru?
What do I think of Planet X and Nibiru? I think it's interesting. I was a pretty big Planet X skeptic, only because some of the arguments against Planet X were, in my opinion, they were pretty sound. First, you have bringing it back to Dr. Heiser, SitchinWasWrong.com is one of his main websites, right? And he shows that Sitchin was very loose or liberal with some of his interpretations, and if you get into sort of the linguistic nitty gritty, it's not as clear cut as Sitchin suggests. So there's that. But then part of the big argument against Planet X from sort of a scientific or secular view was that if there was a planet that comes into our solar system as we understand it, then the Earth would be destroyed because everything would be out of place and blah, 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 blah. Now, I find it interesting that it's that very argument of perturbations in the outer planets or whatever that modern science has more or less admitted that there is another foreign object out there that is interfering, that has an elliptical orbit. I mean, all these things that Planet Xers have been saying for years, and now science is saying the data lines up. We haven't seen this planet or this object, but the science and the math lines up. There is something out there that seems to be tugging at, our solar system, and so I think it's possible that there's something out there, but man, I don't know. I can't tell you that I believe that there is or there isn't. We talked to Doug Elwell, who does a good job of showing biblically, from his perspective, some interpretations of the Bible that apply the Planet X concept to it. And I think it's interesting. I think it's fascinating. I don't think you can dismiss it outright. But it's I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm kind of like, huh. But then there's another part of me that I'm not, and this is gonna set off flames, but I'm not a flat earther. But I understand this light is just crazy. I understand the discussion. I understand the passion people have about that topic and the reason why they're so passionate about it, because, it really does raise the question, I guess the epistemological question is the proper phrase there, but of how we know what we know. And in that regard, it really is a good question. Like, how do we know what's up there? Do we trust the people that say they know what's up there? That sort of thing. I get all that. I understand that approach. So in that sense, I can chalk it up as potentially a huge deception coming. There's a TV show called The Event, where the last episode, they didn't get to a second season, but in the last episode, these people who are actually aliens, they look just like people that have integrated into human society, sounds kind of familiar. They go to a collider. They do something with some technology. They open up a portal, and boom, their planet that was dying appears in the sky over the Earth. And so there it is. There's kind of that tie into Planet X, and maybe that's something that's going on. I don't know, but I see all the theories. I've waded through a lot of the different perspectives, and I'm not going to sit on one interpretation or one view of it just because I don't know. I really don't know for sure, but I do find it interesting. I do find it a fascinating topic, and I keep my finger on the pulse. I'm not gonna tell you that I know for sure, because I don't. But I do think it's an interesting topic that's worth sort of keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's why we've done a couple of shows, on the Sharpening Report about Planet X. We've had Paul Begley on to talk about it, and Mark Combs. At some point, I'd like to get Gil Broussard. I have his number. I just haven't had time to schedule anything. But I'm kind of with you on that. I still don't really know what to do with it. I see the evidence is compelling. It's not enough for me yet to dive headfirst into it and say, yes, I'm going to fully back this theory. But it's enough where, like you said, keeping your finger on the pulse and kind of seeing what happens. It's good to prepare just in case. I mean, it's always good to prepare anyway. So I'm with you there. Let's see. Dee Dee asks, if he could interview any one person in the Bible, who would it be and why?
Man, there's so many good people. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, I guess the obvious answer is Jesus, but then that's like everyone's answer. But keeping it, a little bit more, I guess, interesting or different. I'm torn because on one hand, I want to interview Paul because he was just so vital to everything, the theology and his experiences. But then I want to interview John, who wrote the book of Revelation, because I want to know more about what he saw, But then the Old Testament, I would love to interview Ezekiel.
Me too.
Just because he saw some things and it's like, dude, give me more. Like, what, you ate a scroll? Like, what is this about? Like, can you give me a little more than that? So yeah, Ezekiel would definitely be someone that I would love to interview, just based on his visions, but also just his experiences, and just the whole book of Ezekiel is so chock full of so many, fantastic ideas and but also sound theology that really undergirds the gospel. So I would love to interview Ezekiel, but also I would love to interview Enoch. It's like, why did God take you? Why were you so wonderful? So that's a hard question to say one person. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. That's something I've thought a lot about too. Phil has a two-part question. You already kind of answered one of the second part, which he asked about Age of Deceit 3. You already talked about that, but he also wants to know. Let's see. Please have him explain the black goo theory of everything. People may not have seen his YouTube videos on the subject.
Yeah, the black goo theory of everything. So part of the technological development that we've been seeing involves something called synthetic biology and what's called programmable matter. Now, this is an actual division in Microsoft. They have a division for programmable matter. And basically what it is they're taking, small quantum bits, I think at the smallest level, but even bigger than that, particles, and they are able to, or even atoms, they're able to construct whatever they want. That's the goal. They want to construct, they want to build DNA, they want to build any kind of substance, they want to, and they can do it from the molecular level. They can program these things. So when I'm talking, when I say the black goo, it's sort of the culmination, and this is I owe a lot of this to Nicholas in 1968, who really got me on this path of looking at this topic a little more seriously. But it's sort of the end game of where something like programmable matter would go, and that is this artificially intelligent, and some may even suggest sentient, at the very least programmed, substance that can take any form, that can shapeshift, that can do all these things that we've sort of historically looked at and said, oh, that's impossible or that's supernatural, and really make it a tangible thing. If you program the smallest pieces of matter to do whatever, to turn into goo substance, but then be able to construct itself to take on the shape of a person. All these things sound fantastic. They sound like science fiction, but it is really, I think, again, a touching point between the spiritual and the physical, and a vehicle by which demons, fallen spirits can really manifest in a very profound way. Not just like, oh, this ethereal cloud that kind of, mist of a demon that sort of flew by, but like a real tangible physical entity that can, and it philosophically, it's interesting because it breaks down kind of what we are, and I make the point in the video that I made, the Black Goo Theory of Everything, that creation itself is programmed. It's a God's creation. He has programmed, he has algorithms, he has information as a construct that built all this around us. The laws of physics, we've labeled it, we've been able to extract or describe it with mathematical equations. But really, if you think about it, Chuck Missler talks about how we live in a virtual simulation, right? As an analogy sort of to what's going on. And really, I'm starting to see that more and more clearly. I know you've talked about that too in your books. But in tandem with that is this other thing, Black Goo, which would kind of be an antithesis to God's creation in his ordered way, or his ordered fashion of kinds, and not just the environment, but then we have us as agents within this creation to experience it. Now, when we talk about Black Goo, we're talking about programmed matter that can take on any form. And when you think about that, then it ties into the concept of playing God, not creating the dirt necessarily, but creating something or whatever we want, based on our abilities to understand algorithms and mathematical equations or whatever, to program in matter to become or be whatever. Now that's one perspective, but then there's also the gray goo scenario where nanotechnology takes over and basically consumes the earth, and kills off everything. So there's an eschatological paradigm or perspective that the nanotechnologies and nanosciences has brought about in a philosophical way. So it's an interesting topic because I think, as crazy as it sounds, again, Microsoft has a division working on this. It's not that crazy. It's happening. And when you combine it with all the virtual realities and the augmented realities and everything, you tie it all together. And, and really when you think about demon possession, right? Demons, if the theory that they are disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, if that is true, and to some extent that doesn't even have to be true to suggest that demons are seeking host bodies at some level. You have the story of Jesus, casting demons into pigs, that sort of thing. If that is the case, then the Black Goo substance would be a great thing for demons to possess, because then they can take on whatever shape or form they want physically. And that, it's kind of a creepy thing to consider. And I think it potentially ties into the abomination of desolation, and all the scriptures we read about with the image of the beast, the mark of the beast. There's some potentials there. And again, I don't know if they're ever going to achieve it to the level of their theory, where literally it's black goo everywhere, and then all of a sudden, Black Goo programs itself to look like Josh Peck, and he deceives everybody by telling him to buy his book, but it's actually,
you're on to me.
But it's a fascinating topic, and I think one that is worth considering, at least looking at, and also just looking at the amount of Black Goo in entertainment media. That's what made me think, like, oh my goodness, somebody is aspiring for this already. Somebody knows about this already. And there's also that potential with the extraterrestrial side of things where, maybe this stuff already exists somewhere out there and it's flying around, whatever. So it's just one of those topics that I found fascinating and I wanted to share and get people talking or thinking about. So
that's awesome. I'm going to have to check out that video. I haven't had a chance to yet. Lisa asks, has Has Gonz checked out Cliff High's half-past human project? While Cliff abhors religion, his idea of humanity being psychically connected and prescient is interesting. What does Gonz think?
I'm not familiar with Cliff High's video here, but in terms of humanity being psychically connected or prescient, there is something to that. I think I'm not going to say in the New Age sense that we're all connected and we are all one. That's not really the point. But as conscious beings, as beings with minds, God gave us minds. That's why He tells us to have a sound mind as part of our journey. And even there is precedence biblically to have one mind as a church. Of course, there's the beast and his cohorts have one mind as well. But I do think, humanity inherently has a non-physical part of us that interconnects in some way, and that's really all I'll say about it, because if you really want to get into some of that, I think Chris Putnam's book, The Supernatural Worldview, actually documents scientific experiments that seem to suggest some sort of psychic abilities and stuff like that. And I think I'll say this. With psychic abilities and sort of tapping into spirit realms and that sort of thing, I think it ties into what our intentional sort of state was, which was a much more open communication with this physical world and the spirit world. I think in Eden, within Eden, they talk about, or conceptually, it's where heaven and earth met, right? It's where God dwelled on earth. And so it's where heaven and earth sort of intersected, where everything was open. And as the fall took place, there was a barrier that was created. And there's a reason why, I think, and I mentioned this in my last video, but I think there's a reason why in Jesus' second coming, He talks about the heavens rolling up like a scroll. All the mountains and seas are out of place. I think there is a reason for that. I think there's a barrier between us and the spiritual dimension. And also, Him creating a new heaven and a new earth. I think there's a reason for that. I think the corruption is going to not just happen in the physical, but it's going to kind of, spill into the spiritual realm, so to speak. And that's why God has to recreate everything. And I think symbolically, when Jesus was resurrected, what did He do? He tore the veil, right? And we talk about, that was a symbolic gesture to suggest that, now the Gentiles can come in. I agree with that, but I think there's also a sort of a spiritual dimensional wall that was taken down as well, in a sense that, hey, now our spiritual sort of communication with God can be direct, right? And that's not too crazy theologically. I think that's pretty sound. But in terms of our psychic kind of connections, I think that's what it is. I think the way we were created by God, our actual existence is not strictly physical. I think was a much more open communication and open sense of interaction with the spirit realm, and I think that's what we're kind of getting hints of. We have little residue of that or resemblance of that in certain moments, and I think it explains things like deja vu. I think it explains things like, oh, I was just thinking about you and your phone, you called me, or, that kind of stuff that happens to people. We chalk up as coincidence, or we chalk up as the universe talking to us or whatever, right? I don't think that's the universe talking to us. I think that is just inherent in our human nature, and it's been suppressed or protected after the fall, because I think part of the problem was the serpent took advantage of it, right? And sort of wanted us to not be a part of that open family, which, again, Dr. Heiser talks about the divine council and what the initial intent of creation and of what humanity was to live together with his heavenly host, and we were all supposed to be one big family. Serpent didn't like that, so he had different plans. That's part of the whole narrative of the Bible, is to restore that. So yeah, I mean, that's the longest. I'm like, I'll be short, and then I go off for like 10 minutes.
Oh, that's fine. That's what the show's for. But that does make a lot of sense. Ben writes in, I recently listened to Gonz on the Joyspiracy project. What tips does he have for researchers to keep their family lives and research in balance? Also, have you noticed that in the last few years there has been a lot of deception aimed at truthers specifically? Maybe it's the Facebook culture, but it seems that people gobble up conspiracy info without truly testing it.
Oh, yes. Ben, I agree with you. Yeah, so first off, keeping family lives and research in balance. This is, it's an ongoing challenge. Part of the reason why I started a podcast and a YouTube channel and all this stuff was my wife saying, "Don't you have other people to talk about this stuff with?" And I said, "I don't," and that's part of the problem. But that I understand sort of the and I have to respect my wife's perspective, and I think a lot of women in general, or wives, aren't like super into hearing about black goo. They're more concerned about what's going to be on the dinner table, what's my child going to eat, do we have clothes, do we have enough money to pay rent, that kind of stuff. And that stuff concerns me too. But the balance really is in terms of letting it bother you, letting it become something that consumes. And this is I think a lot of us went through this as we started learning about the New World Order and that we've been lied to. And when those sorts of things, when sort of the veil goes down, so to speak, in those topics, you can go through a period. I think Chris White called it like a crazy period or something like that, where you just want to tell everybody, like, "Oh my gosh, guys, they're lying to you. The government it's all lies," and you just want to run around and tell everybody. And it can be destructive to your relationships and everything else in your family, and they think you're nuts now and all this stuff. So balance is difficult to do, but I think from a biblical, this is why the biblical perspective made so much sense, was because it's grounded. It's like, okay, especially for Christians, it's like, all right, you might not want to talk about it, but God talked about it. God showed us in the Bible that this is going to happen. You can take on the Rick Warren version of, "Oh, no, Jesus didn't want us to be worrying about when he's going to return." And really, that's a mischaracterization, because we're not sitting here predicting exactly when he's going to return. But there's a duty of a watchman, right, to sound the horn when he sees anything coming over the horizon. And right now, I think there is an influx of watchmen because there's a lot of stuff coming over the horizon. And it's not enough for one watchman to sound the alarm. There's got to be a lot more. Now, in that process, I do think that people have lost a little bit of the rigorous kind of vetting that is necessary in this community, to the detriment of, in general, the conspiracy truther community. If people jump on stories, and I'm guilty of it too. Like, I'll see something, I'm like, "Dude, that's crazy," and jump all over it, and then realize it was a hoax or whatever, and then just but then I have to come clean with it. Oh, it was a hoax, or it was a mistake, or whatever. But yeah, I think Facebook culture is huge. I've seen a lot of people, personalities on Facebook, who will say something and just call it, "Oh, the conspiracy, here it is," and then speak about it as fact. Like they know for sure it's fact, and then everybody kind of jumping on that. And what bothers me sometimes is the link droppers, the link bombers, the drive-by link bomb. They'll say something and they'll drop a link. Josh Peck is an Illuminati agent. I know this for a fact. Check out this video.
Yeah, what I mean? This 3-hour-long video.
This 3-hour video where he clearly puts up the Illuminati hand signals 10
for
times.
half a second. Yeah.
And there you go. There's my evidence.
Yep.
And so we've lost kind of the rigorous sort of, and that's going to happen. And I think that's a detriment to, again, the truther community in general, because, we're sort of marginalized already, right? We're kind of like out there. And I think there has been a concerted effort by the establishment, if you want to call it that, to sort of discredit the truther community, or to infiltrate it to make it more sensational than it really should be, and that sort of thing. So, I think we have to all be careful, and we have to all sort of vet each other. We have to stay vigilant in that process. I think there's a reason why 1 John 4 tells us to test the spirits, because I think, and that's the other thing. People say, I got this revelation from God. I know for sure this is truth because I got it from God. Okay, maybe, but think of the application of that information. Does it apply to the entire church? Mm-hmm. Because if you're saying that it does, then you're claiming to be a prophet. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And if that's the case, then if you're wrong, then we're allowed to stone you. No, not really. But you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the biblical precedence that's set, is like God is never wrong about that stuff. And I think there is personal revelation that happens all the time. I think God intervenes in that way. But there is you got to be careful where personal revelation and revelation for the church is mixed. If you mix those two, then we might have some issues, because then it becomes about the person and his particular experience or view or knowledge that he might have gotten. So yeah, I mean, I just think we just have to be careful, and it goes for me too. I'm not like perfect in this area. I'm sure I've said some things, I don't know, but I'm sure that I've said some things in videos and stuff where it's like, I'll look back and go, my gosh, I can't believe I said that. That's the most ridiculous thing. It's not vetted. It's not, that kind of thing. So, but I do see a cultural or subcultural, thing where the more, things become just memes, right? Everything. Eventually, there's going to be one meme that represents everything for everybody, and that's it. And maybe that's the mark of the beast. Maybe it's just one big meme, one meme that everyone agrees on. So that's a new theory right there. That the mark of the beast is going to be a meme.
The meme of the beast.
The meme of the beast. It's my next project.
There you go.
Don't take the meme of the beast.
Fantastic. But yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the importance of doing diligent research and at least providing reasons for what led you, what led you to believe whatever you believe. And that's why, like, when I write stuff, I use like a lot of like, I think, or I believe, or this might be. Other people think this, and that's okay because this is why they think that. I do a lot of that stuff partly to kind of help protect myself, but also because I think it's just more honest. It's more it's more human. Because we don't know. I talk about a lot of prophetic stuff, especially with quantum physics and things, and that's a whole area where nobody knows. I mean, you just don't
even
know.
The scientists are like, oh, we don't know, but we think.
Yeah, and I mean, they'll even admit that they don't know. I mean, so in a lot of ways, they kind of have a little more humility than sometimes we do in those areas of at least admitting that they don't know certain things. And so, I try to do that too. But yeah, that's definitely important. Tony writes in, just out of curiosity, back in your Cabana Boy band days, who were some of your favorite bands to listen to and perform with? I was also heavily into the screamo scene back then.
Man, they brought up the Cabana Boy, huh? Quick story, and I think I've told this story in the past. I went to high school with a couple members from a band called Thrice. They were sort of the culprit screamo, Orange County thing. And the singer of Thrice, who his name's Dustin Kensrue, who you might know because he's, I think he became the worship leader at Mars Hill, and he's produced some stuff, The Modern Post and things like that. I think Thrice is coming out with a new album, which I've heard a couple songs are pretty good. And Dustin's sister, who was in my grade, and Dustin's a couple years older than me, asked me, hey, my brother's starting a band. We're looking for a guitar player, bass player. You want to try out? We heard you play guitar. You want to try out? And I'm like, probably they probably stink, and whatever. I don't have time for this. Turned out to be Thrice. So yeah, just a little bit, just a little. So there's that. But yeah, I was really into. I mean, I was a big Metallica fan growing up, but I also loved blues. I was a huge Stevie Ray Vaughan fan, so I learned a lot of Stevie Ray Vaughan licks. Your typical guitar heroes like Jimi Hendrix, and I was into like Stevie Steve Vai
Mm-hmm.
and Eric Johnson. A little bit of Yingwei, but yeah, I wasn't too stoked on Yingwei after I heard some stuff about him. So yeah, I mean, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of music. But yeah, some of my favorite bands in the screamo era, Thrice definitely. I really like Thursday, which toured with them. It's a huge Coheed and Cambria fan. So yeah, those are some of the groups that I really liked.
Good deal. Susan writes in, I was so intrigued by space potentially being some sort of liquid as was described in his video breaking down the Hennessy commercial. I was wondering if he will be doing any more research into this or has uncovered any new elements to this theory.
I haven't uncovered anything new. It's an interesting theory. I don't know how much more we can really do at the moment unless we go up there, or I go up there and I give a report. But it's an interesting thing, and really one of the things that even got me thinking about this idea of space being some sort of liquid potentially. There was a really old UFO, I guess a documentary type thing, where they had footage, the grainy footage, old footage of. And I can't find it. I've been looking for it for a long time. So if anyone out there knows or knows where they can find this footage, there's video of people filming stuff in the sky, and it looks like jellyfish. It's kind of like it literally looks like a transparent sort of living creature you can see it kind of floating in the sky. And that really intrigued me. And that's really when, the first time I really thought to myself, like, there might be something else going on. But that was several years ago. But yeah, I mean, there's not much more to it than I haven't uncovered anything else in terms of that. But that commercial was very interesting. I don't know if you've seen the video, Josh, but it's a fascinating commercial, the Hennessy commercial.
I haven't had a chance to check it out yet. It's another video on your channel I'll have to check out. All right, Jennifer asks, what do you consider to be Doctrine of Demons, as mentioned by Paul in 1 Timothy 4:1? I ask because many consider what we're discussing as fringe.
Yeah, initially, that passage resonated with me when I was looking at a lot of the occult writings of Alice Bailey and Helena Blavatsky. A lot of those, or Masonic writings, Manly P. Hall, stuff like that. And I think that's true. I do believe that is Doctrines of Demons, literally, because they were channeled, by these entities or whatever. But in a broader sense, I think anything that doesn't really align with Scripture, especially those things that are channeled and stuff like that. But anything that really doesn't align with Scripture, I think, can be defined as Doctrines of Demons. You look at evolution, stuff like that, where it's like, no, it doesn't really align with Scripture, has a very hostile or has produced hostility towards the church and Christianity and that belief system in general. So I would say anything that doesn't align with Scripture, and fringe is kind of an interesting word because, yeah, it's fringe because most of the church doesn't talk about it, but it doesn't mean it's not in the Bible. You know what I mean? Like, the stuff we talk about isn't like, well, let me just pull this from, somebody else's writing, and that's what we're going to apply to the church or to the greater body. It's like, that's not what we're doing, really. So it's only fringe from the perspective of kind of the mainstream church that doesn't really look at some of these topics. So.
Fair enough. Melissa wants to know your thoughts on if demons are interdimensional or extradimensional.
Okay. Well, let's see. The difference between interdimensional and extradimensional. Let's see. Inter meaning what? Internal?
I think interdimensional just means they have the capability to go through dimensions, whereas extradimensional, this is at least my understanding of it, extra-dimensional means they're from, or consist of extra dimensions just by nature.
Oh, okay.
Like if we were able to go into another dimension, we would be considered interdimensional, but that doesn't mean we're from there. We're not extra dimensional. So I think that's what. Or she might just want to know broadly if you think that dimensions have anything to do with demons.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in a broad sense, yeah, absolutely. I think it does. I mean, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but the residence of demons is not this physical world. They're constantly trying to manifest in this physical world. So in terms of interdimensionality, yeah, they're interdimensional because they don't reside here, but they want to be here, and they somehow can be here in certain ways. And also extradimensional. Well, yeah, I mean, in a sense, yes, that their place of residence, so to speak, is not here. So I don't know. That's kind of what I get from it.
That makes sense. Melissa also would like to know your thoughts on if the NASA Challenger astronauts are truly still alive. If yes, why is nobody calling this out more?
That's a good question. You know, I've seen some of the pictures and stuff that are out there that line up the alleged NASA Challenger, the people who allegedly died in that explosion, and then the modern sort of pictures of them, and it looks pretty convincing. I just think it's difficult to vet.
Yeah.
This is one of those things that, yes, it's very interesting, and the one, it's more than a meme, but it was like a one-page kind of either a website or an image that shows all the individuals then and now kind of thing. Until somebody does like a real hard, investigation on this topic, literally looking for the people that are allegedly alive and sitting them down or whatnot, it's hard to vet. And I think that's why it's difficult to call it out, other than some of the images and some of the things I've seen on YouTube and Facebook and stuff like that. So
yeah, that makes sense. Rob sent in a ton of questions, and I know you're limited on time right now, so I'll just read through them, and they're all based around. It's basically aliens and the strong delusion. I'll just read the thing, and feel free to take
Sure.
But he asked, who are reptilians? Are they in the Bible? Are they currently mixing with us? Who are the 200 Watchers? Are they in the Bible? What are the small grays versus the tall grays? How does Gonz see the strong delusion playing out in the end? What main points are woven intricately, deceptively incorporated into the delusion, including the elect? There you go!
Describe God and give 3 examples in 5 minutes. Okay, so so reptilians, who are they? Allegedly, they are these race of reptiles that are, David Icke suggests are out there. I think that they are synonymous with the Nakash, the shining ones that is described in Genesis. And if you look at the word study there, you'll understand what I mean by that. Are they in the Bible? If you want to say the Hanakash represents the reptilian or reptiles in that sense, then yes. In terms of the serpent being the dragon, which is Satan, in that sense, yes. Reptilians, not reptilians proper, but just in that sort of broad definition of it, yes, reptilians, again, quote unquote, is in the Bible, if you want to say that. Are they currently mixing with us? Again, hard to say. Secular doctors, researchers, Dr. David Jacob, who we spoke to, suggests that yes, they are mixing with us, but he says they're extraterrestrial. Who are the 200 Watchers? Same deal. I think it's probably, if you look at the sons of God phrasing in Genesis 6, and then you tie it into 2 Peter 2:4, Jude 1:6, the angels that sinned, the angels that left their own habitation. This seems to be what's going on here. And I think they did physically manifest. There's angels in the Old Testament that are physical, clearly. And so they took that, whatever technology, whatever method was used for that to occur, I think that was what happened. And touching this real briefly to the black goo thing, this is where it's interesting, this programmable matter thing, right? Because if we're talking about matter at any level that can be programmed, sperm, eggs, physical body, biology, all that stuff is at a larger scale than little pieces of atom, molecules, stuff like that. So then you start thinking about, they don't have bodies, they can't. Well, if they have the technology or this sacred knowledge, whatever you want to call it, to manifest in that way, then perhaps, they're able to do that. So 200 watchers, are they in the Bible? Not specifically 200. The number 200 isn't mentioned, obviously, but Genesis 6 does mention the sons of God in the same account there. You also have the word watchers, I believe, in Daniel 4, described as the sort of angelic or divine being that interacts with Daniel. What are the small grays versus the tall grays? One's small, one's tall. How does Gonz see? I don't know how to answer that question other than, I don't know. How does Gonz see the strong delusion playing out in the end? Man, all I know is that it's going to be intricately incorporated into the delusion, including the elect. The passage, that he's referring to in Matthew 24, it says it's going to deceive the world, even the elect, if possible, right? So there's that caveat there where, if possible, meaning that, some have taken it's not possible for the elect to be deceived. I think some, but the way I look at it is, there seems to be, and this is kind of where, and I have to do more work in articulating these thoughts here, and I've tried to do it in some videos, but the whole concept of Arminism and Calvinism and sort of predestination and all this stuff, I think it solves itself quite nicely in an eschatological paradigm. So when you look at the end times and you look at those who take the mark and all this stuff, they're unredeemable, and there's a clear separation of the wheat and the tares, so to speak, right? And so in that paradigm, the elect become extremely clear. Who the elect are, who aren't the elect. And in that sense, the great deception will be sort of the culprit to separate, the wheat and the tares, so to speak. And I'm not articulating everything, and I can't get into it too much here in the limited time here, but that's kind of how I see things.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. For the viewers at home, that is the end of viewer questions. Again, if you would like the chance to send in questions to future guests, you can do so at the Sharpening Report Facebook group. You can find it on Facebook, or go to sharpeningreport.com, and there's a link for it there. All right, if people want to find out more about you, check out your show, all your videos, donate to your ministry, all that stuff, where can they go online to find out more about you and what you have available?
Easiest place to go is FaceLikeTheSun.com, which I believe is back up now, finally, thanks to a couple people that helped out. You can find the YouTube channel there. You can find the podcast there as well, CanaryCryRadio.com. You can always go to YouTube, type in FaceLikeTheSun, and you'll see all the videos and everything I've done. You'll even see some FaceLikeTheSun debunked videos, or exposed videos, or whatever. Those are always fun.
All right, good deal. Now, I know we talked about a lot of different things. If you had to wrap up all of what we talked about into one final thought, what would you want the audience most to take away from this interview?
I think the biggest thing is probably to not be afraid. And I say that in a very broad sense, but I do sense, a little bit of fear coming from certain people that are new to this stuff. And then I see people accusing us of fear mongering on the other side, and I do think that there's a reason why we're doing this, and it's not to spread fear. And I think all of us in this community agree about that. But it is important to expose some of the dark things that are happening. Go back to Ezekiel 8. When the leaders of Israel, Ezekiel is shown that these leaders of Israel are worshiping other gods, pagan gods, and they're doing it at night, and they're doing it deep underground, but God shows them this stuff. And, not that we are prophets per se, but I think we're in sort of the I guess if you want to call it a business, or we're kind of in the group of people that I think we were called out to do some of these things for a time, maybe not for our whole lives, but for a time. And at least right now, for me, it's that time. I think for you, Josh, it's that time. And I think that whatever you look at, don't let the fear, whatever fear you might feel with your family, with, because we talked about that a little earlier. How do we balance family life, all this stuff? Don't let that dictate kind of the joy you have in Christ, because that's really what's most important. There's a passage, gosh, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it talks about, you can prophesy, you can speak in tongues, you can heal, you can do all these things, but if you're not doing it in love, it's worthless, right? That's what Paul tells us. So I think keeping that in perspective, that yes, we are exposing dark things. Yes, we talk about some crazy stuff that, cause people to make videos that call us shills or whatever. But ultimately what we're doing is for the Lord, and ultimately we're doing it, and I think a lot of us do a good job of it, doing it in love, in Christ's love, and that word love, the agape, because we care. We care about humanity. We care about the church. We care about where things are headed. And again, we may not have all the answers, and we don't, for sure, we don't have all the answers, but we do have one that is the answer, one that is the solution. And that's what we always constantly point to. And there's joy in that. And really, I think the good news, the gospel, is really good news when you start looking at all these things, because, man, the world is interesting, and it's dark, and it's growing darker. And the darker the world gets, the brighter that the light of Christ shines. So that's about it.
It's a fantastic thought to end on, and I completely agree. This has been such a good conversation, Gonz. It always is with you, and I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. We're going to have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, episode 347. You can book me now. Actually, that's probably not too far away, huh?
Yeah, probably not. This is
the way you're going.
Yeah, this is 109. So yeah.
Let me rephrase. 3,648 episode. Yeah, I'll be back on.
That'll be the one.
That'll be the one.
All right, hang on the line. I'll close this out here. That, again, was Gonz Shimura talking about his phenomenal research into CERN and other areas of eschatology. Gonz also has a number of free materials online. I highly suggest all of them. There's a lot of great information out there that can help us all deal with what's ahead. If you would like to find more episodes of The Sharpening Report, you can do so at sharpeningreport.com and my YouTube channel, youtube.com/JoshPeckDisclosure. Also, if you care to help support the show and this ministry, you can do so at sharpeningreport.com. Your donations go to the everyday running of the ministry and help bring you more episodes of The Sharpening Report, as well as more books and other materials. And I'll say, as I do in every episode, please only donate if you feel God leading you to do so. It is not an obligation. If you're not sure, or if you don't feel led, you can always pray for us. We can always use more prayer. We're not 501c3, so your donations are not tax deductible, and I'm never going to be the kind of person that promises extra blessings from God or a miraculous tenfold return on your money or anything like that. We're not in the business of making promises for God, but what I can promise is your help, be it prayer or financial, is greatly appreciated, keeps us going, and is the only reason we're able to continue doing what we do. So, all that being said, I want to thank you all for joining us in this episode, and this has been The Sharpening Report, and I am your host, Josh Peck. As always, take care, and God bless. Dude, you look so tired.
There we go.
Did you just wake up?
Yeah, dude, it's not even 7 a.m. over here yet.
You're the one that picked the time. I know, this is early for me, and we're 2 hours apart.
Nobody has to know that I picked the time.
Everyone's gonna know. I'm recording right now. I'm putting this in the interview.
Aww.
Ah.